Hey guys, what's up? So last week we went a solid 8 of 8 in my cash line on FanDuel, and 5 of 6, unfortunately, on all my DraftKings cash lineups, thanks to Justin Thomas and Zach Johnson, who is typically a cash play, but um, yeah, he did well at the U.S. Open, but then just yeah, I think his putting carried him there, and then yeah, it was an alright week. I went about even. My GPPs saved me. I had a lot of Cauley and Lee and Streelman and Snedeker, and Streelman and Snedeker came through on Sunday with a big round for me, so that was nice. This week, um, actually pretty similar course to last week, so I think a lot of the guys that did well last week will ride a wave into this tournament. But there's some guys that didn't play last week that I think set up here well. There's some guys that didn't play last week that played the U.S. Open or have been out for a while. So we'll talk about them. But yeah, so in if the number's in green in either of these columns, I'm considering that player for cash. If they're on this list, it's either because they're a good player and the price is interesting, and the stats line up pretty well. But all of these guys are guys that I would consider for GPPs, some more than others. But as far as cash plays go, um, it should be pretty clear when I go through who I think is safe enough play for cash this week. And the stats too. Like if there's something that's sticking out with someone that differs from the stats, I'll point that out. In terms of recent form or long-term form, trending up or down. But besides that, the stats kind of speak for themselves. I'm really targeting this par 4, 450 to 500 range this week. There's a lot of par 4s on the course that fall into that range, and then um, 3 of the 4 par 4s are in that 200 to 225 range, and a few of the other par 4s are in that 400 to 450 range. There are 2 very short par 4s on this course, but I figure that is an opportunity for everyone to score. I don't think that really gives any sort of player an advantage, whereas with the 450 to 500 yard range, you can have guys that dominate those holes with their drivers, or just get in the good position to hit, whichever iron they feel most comfortable with. So ideally, we have a guy that's great in both of those ranges. But if someone is, solid in both or elite in one, um, you know, I think that just shows that these guys can play different length holes differently, and some courses have harder holes of these lengths. So, over time, depending on which tournaments a guy plays, he may have some skewed numbers. Overall, I won't read into it that much, but you want to see someone with green across the board in these stats. So starting at the top, Fowler, you know, he's the favorite. He's the clear favorite. Started out strong at the U.S. Open, kind of tapered off, but yeah, he was right there all week. Koepka was just too good, but Fowler elite in every category pretty much, except for that 400 to 450 range. But I'm not bothered by that at all. I think he's the consensus pick to win. The problem is we play a price-based game, and he is very expensive. It's possible to get him in, but you really have to um, fade a lot of these guys that I think are just as safe with maybe a little less upside. But the thing is, all of these guys below him, I think, to a certain extent at least, can win. Um, it's just a matter of how often, that they would go out and win this tournament. Whereas Fowler, I think, is going to win this tournament this week. But crazier things have happened. We saw it last week with Spieth. Um, Everyone's consensus pick to win the tournament, and he went out there and he did that. I did say last week that Berger would be a very under-owned GPP play. He came in second, almost beat Spieth in the playoff. But yeah, so we're on the right track here with things. Patrick Reed, second highest price guy. Again, I don't think you need to go there in cash, but he's a GPP play. He's rounding into great form right now. The numbers don't really tell the full story. So, you see 122nd strokes gained approach, which is a stat we like to weigh heavily, but Patrick Reed over his last 12 rounds right here, strokes gained approach 60th in this field. So, not great, but, better than 122nd overall for sure. But you can see, too, Reed is gaining a lot of strokes in other places, namely around the green and putting. Not exactly what I want to see, but, he has the talent and form right now to go win this thing. But, I don't see a reason to go there. And then Justin Thomas screwed me last week, so I'm just not going to go back to him. It's one of those things where I don't know. It's a mental block, and people take advantage of that with ownership. So I can see him being maybe a little less owned this week, but I think everyone is kind of thinking the same thing in regards to that. Where, oh, this guy screwed everyone last week. Let's go back to him this week because it's the same kind of spot. He's the second highest favorite to win. He's, it's not like he's changed as a golfer in 1 week. He's still Justin Thomas. He can still go make, 8 birdies in a round. There's nothing stopping him from doing that. Besides himself, sometimes he gets into trouble, but that price too is kind of in a no man's land where if you play him, you may be differentiating yourself already just because I think these guys, Thomas, Fowler, Reed, I think they'll be higher owned in GPPs than they will in cash games just because people can take those risks on other guys in GPPs. But in cash, I'm not going to play any of these 3 guys. I've been starting my cash builds with the next guy here, Mark Leishman. He's just solid everywhere. There's not one part of his game that has been lacking. He's in fact been better than these stats in a lot of these categories recently. His putter lets him down sometimes, but yeah, he's just been on fire. Steady as he goes. I just don't see a reason not to play him in cash this week, especially with that savings that you get from Thomas, Reed, and Fowler. So yeah, Leishman, cash play, GPP play, should be pretty chalky, but sometimes you just eat the chalk and differentiate elsewhere, and I think this is a good week to do that because there are various guys down here in these lower ranges that I think may go a little overlooked. So Leishman, cash, GPP, fine with that. Bill Haas, another guy, his price has been all over the place this year, but really hit a rough patch for a few weeks, and normally a good cash play, but his upside is always limited just because he's not going to go out there and go super low. But I do like him a lot here this week. He owns Congressional, which is in the DC area where they play this tournament. On most years, it'll be every other year now, switching between the venue they play this week and Congressional. But Congressional is like Bill Haas's home, man. He owns that course. He did well at the U.S. Open when it was there, but that's not where they're playing this week. So if you see people talking about Bill Haas course history, just don't listen to them. And if they are, I probably wouldn't listen to them about anything else either. But it's the same tournament, so maybe that plays a little something, but I don't know. Either way, the stats line up pretty well for Haas here. He dominates our 450 to 500 range along with Fowler and Leishman. So I think if you're looking for another cash play, another GPP play, you can take Haas. The only reason that I would go Leishman over Haas is just that longer term Mark Leishman steadiness that Haas doesn't have, just because he was really bad for a couple weeks in a row there. So I would just lean Leishman for 300 more, but that's going to be the popular move. So I don't know what to make of Haas's ownership this week. He kind of falls into the same range of guys on FanDuel and DraftKings. So I think Leishman will be popular in both of those price ranges, but Haas is right there. I think he's a great play this week. Holmes, I'm just not going to touch him. I can't touch him. He's been just really inconsistent. He just hasn't been hitting greens, and that's a problem when you know all these other guys around you in your price range are hitting greens. So I don't see a reason to go with him this week until he shows me that he can go back out there and be consistent. Um, I don't even need to go there in GPPs. I think this is a range where the chalk is strong, especially Leishman, Haas, and the guys we'll talk about here that I think are solid plays. One of those guys, Kevin Chappell, he tends to play well in harder courses and not deeper fields, but harder courses, but not so strong fields. I mean, we saw last year he got denied by Jason Day twice, and then he came out in one of the tournaments earlier this year without really a very strong field, and came out and won finally. So he's got that monkey off his back, but he hasn't pulled a Wes Bryan and just started missing cuts. Chappell knows that he can go out and win these weaker field events, so I like him in cash on FanDuel at 8K. That's a great price for him. I think he's safe in that range. And even his stats are a little off, just because of really long-term stuff. But last 12 rounds, he's been on fire, particularly on the approach game, which is what I like to see. He's got his irons dialed in. If he just gets that putter hot this week, I think he can go out and win. I've seen a lot of people picking him to win too, and I like the play, especially for 8K on FanDuel. I mean, why not, right? DraftKings price is a great price, but I think I'm going to stick to GPPs with Chappell just because there's another guy I like for savings that I think is just as safe. That guy is not Russell Henley. Henley's price is super appealing on FanDuel, but just with the way he's been playing lately, I can't, in good conscience, roster him in cash over there. All these stats tell a great story, but I mean, if you want to look at Henley, I'll pull up his game log for a second here. Probably avoid showing you those. Yeah, Henley here. So 10 of 13 made cuts. That looks good, but St. Jude. Not the strongest field cut. Byron Nelson, pretty strong field cut, and then, this was his time back in the earlier parts of the season, 43rd, 9th, 45th, wins in the Shell Houston, 11, 26, 25, but, that's a downslope right there, and then comes back out at the U.S. Open and plays well, but just with the way Henley has been, I don't know, he was a great ball striker at the U.S. Open, so I'm definitely going to have shares of him in GPPs on both sites, but I'm not the biggest Henley guy right now in cash. I just don't know if I can go there this week. But a guy that I like in cash this week is Finau. He's just good, and I think he's going to be relatively chalky this week, but I don't care. He's going to go out and win one of these tournaments sometime. One of these not Puerto Rico Open events. So I think, this could be a week for him, but nothing about his game really makes me not want to play him this week. He's just been in good form. He's a solid player, and that's about all we need to talk about with Finau. Same goes for Steele. He's going to be very chalky again this week. Maybe not so much at that FanDuel price, but um, I definitely like the play. If I had to pick Steele or Finau, I'd probably pick Steele just because his around the green game um, has been better than Finau's. It's been one of the best on tour, and his putting is better too. So if I have to pick one of those guys, it's going to be Steele. But on the same token, they're both solid plays this week. Horschel is a GPP play only. Just you don't even have to look at the stats very much. You can just look at the game log. He goes out and wins, misses the cut. Goes out and backdoor T4, missed the cut. And, so it's like, come on, man. What do you... And, my thing is, what has Billy Horschel done for me lately? Well, he's, cost me money. If he makes the cut at the U.S. Open, I win that week. So that's annoying. I'm not going to play him very much this week. That FanDuel price is just tempting, but I've fallen into the Billy Horschel trap before in cash. I'm not going to do it again this week. You can play him in GPPs, that's fine, but yeah, he's just inconsistent as hell lately, and I can't go there. Keegan Bradley played really well last week at a course that he always plays really well at. That's his hometown course, pretty much. So, am I going to be playing Keegan in cash this week on either site? Hell no. Am I going to play Keegan in GPPs this week? Probably not. I just don't find myself rostering him at that price this week. Ben On, another guy that his upside has just not been there. He's just been making cuts. But, at some point, I want to see more out of him, and I just haven't been seeing it. His off the tee game has been great, but around the greens putting, he hasn't been great. His approach game has been strong, but there are players that have been playing better in this price range that we'll get to than Ben On. He's just a popular play because he is considered an elite ball striker and cut maker, but I think there's more upside to be had than On this week. And I'm going to go for that upside that I think is really just as safe, if I'm being honest with myself. Lingmerth is one of those guys that I think is just as safe and has more upside. He has won at this course before on a different tour. His price on both sites is cash viable, in my opinion. And his game has been strong recently. So, I want to go back to Horschel for a second. These stats go back 12 rounds. So, 4 of those rounds were a win. 4 of those rounds were a T4, I think, and then 4 of those rounds were missed cut. So, yeah. Or this is a par 70 only, excuse me, which this course is this week. If I limit it to par 70, it takes out some of the par 5 skewed scoring, but Horschel scores well on par 4s, so yeah, GPP play only for me, but you see these other guys here, Chappell, Steele, Finau, Fowler, Leishman, Haas, Reed. These are all guys that I think are cash viable, and here's our boy David Lingmerth. The approach game hasn't been great, but around the green putting has been on point. 101st in this field, strokes gained approach, par 70. I'm not too worried about that recent stat just because, he's still been hitting that upside. So, I'm worried that he's going to stop doing it at some point, but at the same time, he hasn't in the past month. So, I don't really see a reason not to play Lingmerth this week, other than the fact that he might be chalky based on that narrative that he's won here before. You could fade him, but, I'd rather fade him on DraftKings where I think his price is, there's a lot of good pivots. His price on FanDuel, I think there are less solid pivots around him. Um, but at the same time, I don't know. I mean, because the guys are different, right? You have Henley and Horschel around him on FanDuel. You have Ali, who we'll get to, Stanley, um, Cauley, Siwoo. These guys that you can pivot off of Lingworth too. DraftKings, you've got a whole different crop of guys. So yeah, I don't mind it, but I think Lingworth is a cash viable play this week. Xander is another guy that I think is cash viable only on FanDuel just due to the pricing. I'll have him over there just because he's been so hot lately. He kills this range that we look at here, and for a guy that's in as good of form as he's in, I don't really see a reason not to go there this week. I mean, you see around the green has been his downfall. Approach has been not the greatest, but off the tee and putting, he's been pretty on point. So that's what I like to see out of a guy that is in good form. He's coming around here, and he's been placing very well, and just dial in those irons a little bit more, and he should be solid. Ollie's a guy that has taken a few weeks off, so I don't think he'll be highly owned this week. He just hasn't really it's not fresh in anyone's minds. Like, oh yeah, I had Ollie this week, and he did really well. But yeah, he's right around Xander in terms of strokes gained last 12 rounds, 12 or 14 cuts. He's just been solid. Missed the Shell Houston and the Valspar, but other than that, he only has 2 outside the top 50. But at the same time, he hasn't really shown, besides the heritage, that he can go out there and really compete at one of these courses. So 8,300 I think is a bit of a premium for him. I think there's guys that are cheaper that are the same player basically in this field. So I'll go with those guys over Ollie this week. That FanDuel price is tempting. It's interesting, but he just hasn't done anything for me lately. And taking a few weeks off, I like to see a guy that's playing 1 week, plays really well, and then goes the next week and does the same. And right now, Ollie just took a few weeks off. I don't hate the play, but I'm not dying to roster this guy either. Danny Lee is a guy that I will be rostering in cash, probably on DraftKings and FanDuel. That price is a little high for him, a little higher than I'd like to pay, but he's earned it lately. I mean, sixth, I think 44th, and then a T3 last week. So last week he was the guy that got me a lot of the GPP monies that I won. So he was relatively low owned on both sites, which I thought was surprising just because of the form he's been in. But yeah, he's definitely a guy I'm targeting cash this week. He's from that last 12-round data that we pulled up. He's just been on fire, and I think you just ride the wave. David Hearn is a guy that the stats are bad, but he's 2 top 10s his last 2 times out. If you're gonna play him anywhere, honestly, I don't know if you really want to play him anywhere, just because I think these guys around him are just better. But at the same time, that FanDuel price is cheap. Xander's going to be really popular over there, and people just don't want to play David Hearn. I don't want to play David Hearn. I haven't heard anyone that's like, oh yeah, David Hearn is in a great spot this week. I mean, people talk about him, but they don't end up going there. I'm not going to go there either. But if you do, I wouldn't hate the play. He's just been, 2 top 10s the last 2 times out. It kind of speaks for itself. He's in good form. Harris English is a guy that people might look at the miscut last week and think, oh, hey, he's back on the miscut train. But, he only had one. Well, it's hard to say you only had one really bad hole, and that really bad hole was an 11. Which just killed his off the tee stat. But his off the tee stat is bad. So this is a course with a ton of trees, and there's water, and there's bunkers, and you know, you know, who better to find their way in there than Harris English? So I don't know. I'm probably just not going to go there, um, and hope he misses the cut. Um, Hope he pulls another 11. I mean, outside of that 11, he was great last week. Would have made the cut had he just bogey doubled that hole. I think he would have made the cut just fine, but he didn't, and I don't want to say that one bad hole puts me off of a guy, but when you show the capability to go out there and literally put yourself out of a tournament on one hole, that is not what I want. And Horschel did the same thing at the U.S. Open. I think he went out there because I checked my lineups as soon as they went off, and Horschel was like negatives from the get-go. He shot, I think, a 9 on his first hole, and I was just like, well, all right, there goes these lineups because, yeah, Horschel screws me. But yeah, Jimmy Walker is a guy, he had Lyme disease, but he won the PGA Championship last year. He's a world-class player. Just been kind of off and on. I mean, he played the Players and the U.S. Open coming off the Lyme disease, but of course he's going to go play those because the opportunity cost of playing those tournaments is high. Why would you take off that week when you could potentially go out and win the damn thing? I mean, he probably didn't think he would, but that opportunity is always there. And in a field or in a tournament that pays out the way it does, it just makes sense to go out and shoot your shot at it and see what happens. But I think entering a tournament like this is a sign that he's trying to get back into the into the swing of things here. But until he shows me a little something, I can't really play him, especially not at that FanDuel price. I'd be more tempted on DraftKings, but I'd rather just play Bud Cauley, who continues. I mean, besides the missed cut at the U.S. Open, which I'm not going to hold against him just because it's it's the U.S. Open. Whatever. But besides that, he's been pretty elite this year everywhere except for the greens and around them. Yeah, so around the green putting, off the tee, a little iffy, but that approach game, man, it's on point. So tee to green, he's just, he's a great player, and I'd rather have him over Jimmy Walker this week, just because, in cash especially, I'm finding myself in this 7,700 range. I like Cauley. Martin Laird is a guy that I won't have any of anywhere. I just kept him here because he's been making cuts, but there's no upside with him. Kyle Stanley is a guy that is a statistical beast, as you can see. I'm going to have Kyle Stanley in cash everywhere this week. He's just a guy that I always play in cash at this point. Last week was a little concerning for me with Stanley. He has not been killing it lately statistically, particularly around the greens and putting. But the rest of his game has been so solid that it's just been carrying him through. And, 109th, 97th recently in those around the green stats. Not what I want to see, but the rest of his game really stands out, I think, above everyone else's here that I'm not going to worry about it too much. And I haven't heard anything, that in this course is going to play super tough around the greens. So I'm not too worried about it. It's not a course like the Masters where like Augusta, where your short game is imperative. But yeah, I think Kyle Stanley is fine in cash on either side. His upside is there. I think he's due for a win. The problem is his short game has been so bad that it's just holding him back. But then there's a guy like James Hahn, who's a GPP play for sure. He's just been really hot, particularly in these ranges that we want to see, these par 4 ranges. So I don't mind a GPP flyer on him, but I'm going to take Stanley and cash over him every day of the week. 6,100 is interesting on FanDuel, but like I said, I'd rather just play Xander, who is going to be super chalky. But I think you eat that chalk just with how hot he's been. If Xander goes out there and, top 10s again this week at, 60, 70% ownership, like I think he might be, then you're really going to be screwed. Then there's always the chance Xander goes and misses the cut, but with the form he's been on, which was more likely, I think a top 20 is more likely than a missed cut for him. Billy Hurley, people are going to play him based on he's elite history at Congressional, a win, an 8th, and I think a 6th or a 4th. But yeah, just straight elite course history at Congo, but I'm not going to play him this week. I'm going to let people try to chase that. He just hasn't been great recently, and people are going to look for any reason to play this guy, and I'm just going to fade him. Even at that FanDuel price, it's 5,700 is appealing. There's another guy that I like better at that price that's been hotter, that I think actually fits a little better here. But we'll get there. Boo Weekly, a guy that popped last week, but I don't really want to go back there this week. He just hasn't been consistent enough for me. Siwoo Kim is really interesting because he is a world-class talent. The long-term stats, these are bad. I would almost recommend just straight ignoring stats when it comes to this guy and just trusting people that he is a great player, which you can kind of see. Wrong Kim up there, but last 12 rounds he's been much better. And he's been playing through injury this year, but we know he has the talent. He showed it at the Players, the U.S. Open, to go out there and win a strong field event. I don't know what it is about these weaker field events that Siwoo doesn't come out here and win them, but he's always a withdrawal threat. I'm just not going to go there and cash, even though the upside is immense. I think the withdrawal risk / go through the motions and just kind of keep swinging the club risk is high enough that I'm just not going to go there. Kevin Tway's a guy that's been popping a lot recently, but I'm not sold on him long term. He's a guy that he started to do what Xander's doing now, and then now is just kind of making cuts and hanging around. He hasn't been elite necessarily anywhere, I don't think, but off the tee. He should be up here on this list. There he is. Yeah, we'll take it back. His approach game has been super solid recently. You could go there and cash. I wouldn't hate it. I also I'm going to skip a few guys. I'll come back to them. But while we're on the topic here, there's this 75, 7,400 price ranges. There's going to be a lot of decisions to be made between Tway, Dillette, Na, Streelman for me in cash games because I keep landing on one of these guys. And I think the way that I'm leaning right now is Streelman just because of how hot he's been. Tway had that hot streak, but that was, a little while ago. If I take out par 70 alone, we'll see how Tway stacks up against Streelman. But Streelman's been playing really well. If I take out par 70, go strokes gained total. Yeah, Streelman number one. That is that pretty much solidifies it for me. I'm gonna go Streelman over Tway and just leave some money on the board there. But these other guys too. If you sort things different ways, you get to see different things. And I'm not gonna put in all these filters just because they might start being too specific and showing things that that don't necessarily relate to a golfer's true current form, because they're going to narrow, which tournaments count. And you may end up getting 4 rounds from last week, 4 rounds from 2 weeks ago, and 4 rounds from a month ago, which, that month ago probably isn't as pertinent as whatever tournament they played, par 72 or par 70, that was 3 weeks ago, So I just like to keep things as recent as possible. But yeah, you see Streelman at the top, Lingmerth, Stanley, Leishman, Siwoo Steele. Uh, Another guy we'll get to, Fowler, Horschel, Hahn, on. These are all guys on my list. These are all guys that I'm talking about, except Jim Herman. I'm not sold on him being good. But yeah, Cawley's on here, Xander, Haas, Hearn. These are guys that I think are cash plays this week. Tway's way down here. Not too far down, but far enough down where I'm not sold on him. Nas down there too. Nah, just hasn't been putting it all together recently, off the tee especially, and none of his game, no part of his game is really picked up for that. So yeah, I'm not really going to be on him. But you see Ollie too, who's just been good. But the approach game off the tee has been a little lacking, which is probably limiting his upside recently. Henley, last 12 rounds overall, exactly what I was talking about. His approach game, his putting has been shit, even though he's been great at it all year. Hadwin, super mediocre recently. Another guy that I think people are going to play in cash. But I'm going to be playing. I'm going to skip a few of these guys that I'm not going to touch in cash games. But Kokrak I will play in GPPs on FanDuel just because of that price and his upside. I can't play Jason Kokrak in cash. It's just like a mental block for me, and I don't think I need to. With Streelman is a cash lock on FanDuel. Streelman and Scheifele, Xander, the X-Man. Those two are going to be cash locks for me on FanDuel, along with Leishman and Steele. And once I have that half of my lineup, I kind of go from there and fill it out with some of these other guys that I'm talking about. Trying to keep it balanced, I think, in that 8 to 7K range. I don't really want too many of these 6K guys. If there was two more I would go with, it would be Dillette and Tway. And then I'd probably decide between them based on this recent form angle. Dillette been super solid everywhere but around the greens, which is where he is just trash to begin with. So I think I like Dillette over Tway a little bit. We know Dillette has played really well at certain courses in the past. And Tway, long term, he's shown up places before, but he was not a household name until that streak that he went on a few weeks back. So I think Tway's kind of going on the downslope here, and he's kind of like the Nick Taylor effect, where he had those top 20s, and now he's back to Nick Taylor, around T60 or miscut T50 area. I think Dillette is going to have a better spot here. So if I had to play Dillette or Tway, it would be Dillette over on FanDuel. And I played both of them over Nah. But, Streelman and Scheifele are going to be the guys that I'd rather even have them than any of these 67, 68K guys. But yeah, Kokrak and GPPs. Summerhays is a guy that I don't play. I just don't play Summerhays. I don't mind if you do, but I just don't think he's a class enough golfer. I don't think he's talented enough to go really make me regret fading him this week. Wes Bryan is a guy that is very talented, but he's just been erratic off the tee, so much so that his entire game has been suffering. It's been just killing his scoring overall. He's really having to make do with bad tee shots, and that's really limiting his upside. We saw it after 2 rounds that he was in a good spot last week at the Travelers and just faded on the weekend. So I'm just not going to be there. Charles Howell III is a guy that's going to be very, very popular this week, I think. But he also might not be, just because he's been injury layoff for a while. It's a back injury, same as Rory. And, we saw Rory come back and look rusty. Howell might do the same. And, even when he's healthy, Howell tends to run around that cut line. He'll make the cut, but his upside tends to stick around T20. So I'm just not going to really be on him very much. If he goes back to making cuts, like he normally does, but limiting upside, then yeah, sure, I'd play him in cash at this price. But, I don't know if that's the Charles Howell that's going to show up this week, and he's known for fading a bit after the Masters. As it gets into these summer months, the East Coast swing, Charles Howell kind of slows down. So I'm just going to let him do his thing on his comeback tour here. And you can't really pay attention to the stats because they're from the tournaments where he normally does well because they're on the West Coast. That's where he normally makes his money, and he's actually had a really good round at this course before, but it may or may not have been before the redesign. So I'm just not going to weigh into that very much. I think just the rustiness is going to be a bigger factor than I think people want it to be, and I'll just stay away. He hasn't shown that upside to kill me anyway, so why would I take the chill when I can go down to some of these other guys? Garrigus is a guy that I had on here because of his course history at Congressional, but I'm just going to straight up ignore him this week. In fact, watch me delete Garrigus. Yeah, watch him go win though. Yeah. That's probably the way it'll go. Hadwin is a guy, his stats too, they're kind of like Henley's where they show the results of a hot streak earlier in the year where he won 6th place. But since then he's just been, T60, T50, T60. And that's not going to get the job done most weeks. Why would I play Hadwin this week when I can play Grayson Murray, who, although overall hasn't been as good, if you look at Hadwin's stats and you look at Murray's stats, it's going to be pretty obvious which guy has been better, around the green, putting, approach. Hadwin's been much, much better. Even these efficiency stats, Hadwin has been better, generally speaking, than Murray, but, pop into the old recent form machine here. Grayson Murray, this DraftKings points number is skewed because he had a hole-in-one last week, and I think he's one of the only players to have a hole-in-one within the last 3 tournaments, last 12 rounds. So yeah, Murray's DraftKings points are going to be skewed, but the whole rest of the game is solid right now. Okay, Grayson Murray has me blocked on Twitter, but that's not going to preclude me from trying to win money with him. I think on FanDuel he's a solid cash play as well. I don't know if I need 3 guys in the $6,200 to $6,400 range, but I think if you want to get one of these, Patrick Reed, Justin Thomas, Ricky Fowler, I think if you're going up to that range in FanDuel cash, I'll just say play Fowler because the money shouldn't be as prohibitive as it is on DraftKings. You've got 1,000 between the Reed Thomas combo and Fowler. Whereas on FanDuel you only have 400, 500 between those guys. So I don't see a reason not to just take Fowler and move on. So I think it's definitely in play to take, Murray, Strillman. Where's the other fucker? Xander. At those low 6K ranges, and then plug in a Fowler and consider that the first half of your lineup, and then go with the 7 to 8K range from there, and just see kind of throwing your hundreds around which one of like Leishman, Haas, Steele, Finau, Lingmerth, toss Lingmerth, Lee in there and see where you have salary left. That's kind of how I like to build my lineups on FanDuel. Just toss in, I want these guys, and just you kind of end up with different salary remaining combos, and you just make it happen. I don't really try to play ownership. I don't really want to play ownership too much. I kind of rather would just take the best plays that I think are at each price point and move on from there. Because I found it to be more profitable just playing the best plays rather than trying to move off of the guy due to ownership, getting onto a worse play, and then regretting it in the end. And take for example Danny Lee last week. Danny Lee was like 5% owned on FanDuel and GPPs, you know, and I thought he was a great play. So when I look at it, I'm like, well, why would I not just play the guy that I think is a great play? Um, you know, regardless of ownership. If he turns out to be chalky, then well, fine. Whatever. Whatever. But if he turns out to be 5% like Danny Lee was, then you're sitting very well. When the guy that you thought is a great play, or that I thought is a great play, is going to go out there and do what we want him to do, which is exactly what Lee did last week. I think Streelman might be the same way on DraftKings this week, just in that price range. It's very strong. Um, I don't see a reason not to play Streelman. He's just been on fire. But Grayson Murray, I think, is firmly in play on cash on both sites. It's one of those things that feels dirty to say because we know he's Grayson Murray, but just, if I'm telling you that a guy is going to be, 6,800, it reminds me a lot of Hadwin when he was on his streak earlier this year, Just why would I not be playing this guy when he's putting up 70 DraftKings points a week? And okay, yeah, MDF at the Players, but that's the Players, tough tournament, tough field, tough course. Wells Fargo, Heritage Shell, this was when he was getting into form, and even those were not gravy, fields. And then Travelers, you got some bigger guns. The St. Jude, you had some bigger guns. Memorial, Byron Nelson. These aren't pushover fields, and Murray was, he's been hovering in this low range, and I'm just gonna play him because he's been getting the results and the stats show it. So I'm just gonna play Murray this week. Like, I don't care who he is. I'd rather play him in the Hadwin. And List, I think, is a GPP play only. God, don't ever play. I forget which tournament it was, but List was popping so well statistically just because he was playing in these other weak field events. And I had List and Keegan in cash, and God, that is something that I would never do again. I think it was the Valero. We had this Texas tournament narrative with him, and I played him in cash at the Heritage too. Like, so I'm so off of Luke List that, does he have the talent to go out there and win this week? Sure, but he makes his bank on par 5 scoring, and that really helps you on a par 72 course. And this is a par 70 course, a lot of par 4s, a lot of par 3s relative to par 5s. So I think if you're going down in this range, you're going to just take Murray and move on. He might be popular, sure, but I think he's a good cornerstone to your lineup. You can differentiate other places. So if there's a guy that's not on this list, man, I just got out of the shower coming home from the gym, and my hair is wild right now. But yeah, if there's a guy that's not on this list that you have questions about, just due to really anything, looking at the game log, you know, want any more information on any of these guys, um, feel free to find me on the Twitter machine. I have, I at one point was just kind of dealing with DFS stuff on my personal account, but I'm going to try to separate them a little more. So, yeah, my DFS Twitter account is mandrews93dfs, and you can find me there. Shoot me questions. You can tweet them, send the DMs. I don't care. I prefer if you tweet them just so I can answer them and have other people potentially see them, or at the end of the week you can say you asked me name your top 5 this week. Well, I'd probably beat Fowler, Leishman, Chappell, Steele, Danny Lee. You know, say that's I think like the top 5 scoring golfers. Obviously it's really hard, impossible to fit them in a lineup just because of pricing. But mix and match the guys that I think are going to finish in the top 5, and then I nail 3 of them, 4 of them. Or you put 3 or 4 of them on a lineup and they win you money. If you retweeted that, that would be awesome. But yeah, so I hope we get 8 of 8 again this week, like last week. It was surprising last week actually with 8 of 8. I had a little sweat with Stanley's third round, and then dropped me back towards the cut or the cash line there. And Snedeker didn't play well, and yeah, it was an ugly Saturday. But then I woke up and Streelman was -6, and Snedeker was just on fire. So yeah, turned out to be a very nice week over there for me. And I had a DraftKings lineup that would have in that make the cut, survive in advance cash game from the U.S. Open. I had a DraftKings GPP lineup that would have been up there in the winnings there. I think it would have been $100 or $75 dollars off of basically that free entry. Yeah, I had it in the 5K short game, 525 points. Paul Casey, Bud Cauley, Danny Lee, Webb Simpson, Spieth, and Streelman, with Danny Lee and Streelman being 3% and 4% owned. And that's like what I was talking about. These guys I think are great plays. I don't care what other people are saying. These guys are great plays, and people are going to overlook them for whatever reason they want to overlook them. I'm going to play my guys. I'm going to make a condensed 30 player-ish player pool this week, and I think I'm going to fire into the quarter arcade heavy. Just because I think I have a narrow core and I really want one of these lineups based on my narrow core to hit. I don't really have the bankroll to do it in like the $3 or the $4 yet. The goal is to get there, obviously, but trying to make my money on cash games, and when you have a week like last week where I have the $500 to go from Casey to Justin Thomas, and at the time, of course, you're looking on paper and you're thinking, well, what's the real difference between these guys this week, other than I think Thomas has more winning potential and DraftKings point scoring potential. Well, Thomas goes out there and fucks around and misses the cut. So when you have something like that, and then of course Spieth, the other stud, going out and winning, that really screws you in cash games. So I think I kind of learned my lesson there. Differentiate and try to balance with your lower price guys. Justin Thomas really screwed me last week, so I'm gonna try to learn from that. And it was nice last week to have the GPPs kind of save the day and keep me afloat in cash games on DraftKings. FanDuel was money everywhere. I think I only had 2 GPP lineups that didn't cash. I made 7 lineups. My cash lineup won easily. GPPs were around 5 times return, so that was a good week. But yeah, we'll try to do it again this week. And if you have any questions, hit me up. I'll have my Twitter in the description below. So yeah, good luck.